I was mayor of a small town. I'm an adoptee, grew up with white folks and lived in a predominantly white community my entire life. Through that process, I unexpectedly met my birth father and that side of the family.
Welcome to the Take 1.5 podcast. This is your host, Min Lee.
My name is Jenna Lee Kim. I'm currently living in Jeju in the Republic of Korea, but I moved here in July of 2023 with my family. I was mayor of a small town, about 5,000 people in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I loved all the work that I was doing with community there. But I do say that the reason I have this opportunity to be living in Korea is because I held that position. It was because of the connections that I made and the opportunities that I had. One thing led to another. I talk about it as the dominoes falling. One domino fell, and then they all fell in rapid succession very, very quickly. During the pandemic, there was a lot of time and room to start thinking about things, and there was a lot happening in the community across the United States, of course, about AAPI violence and increased reports of folks who look like me and folks who look like my kids, and the community was asking for folks to step up and really speak out against things that were happening. So there was about a 2-month period that I was very, very famous in the Philadelphia area. Everyone was very excited they had an Asian American mayor to interview. Shortly after that, nobody cared anymore. I knew it was really important to be talking about these issues, but I had no idea what it was like to be an Asian American. I'm an adoptee who came to America as a baby, and I grew up with white folks, lived in a predominantly white community my entire life. So it was that made the dominoes begin to fall. And I have a really good friend who I met from being mayor. Her name's Melissa. She introduced me to the Me in Korea Mosaic Tour. And through that process, I unexpectedly met my birth father and that side of the family. And a year later, one thing led to another, and my family and I ended up moving here for many reasons. But one, of course, was to be in Korea, to give that experience to my kids, for me to understand Korea better. Everything sort of lined up. And so we've been here ever since. And I was also able to track down information about my birth mother, also unexpectedly. And I met her in June of 2024. And it's been a whirlwind. My life got upended a little bit, and here I am talking to you.
How does that happen in one's life?
Well, it's amazing, and it even more so because I spent almost 40 years as an inter-country transracial adoptee, never thinking it was possible to find family. I mean, I certainly thought that someday I would come over here and visit, although that's a little bit of a mental block for myself and a lot of adoptees. When you're growing up in the United States for so many years, nobody really talked about Asia. I mean, I remember there was a Big Bird special through Sesame Street. He went to China, he went to Japan. He skipped right over Korea. When you're growing up, it just wasn't a part of, the lexicon or thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so being able to come over here and understand that you can meet your birth family and that it's possible, I found all of that out within the same second. I got a phone call from my adoption agency. I mean, that sort of foundational shift in your thinking and identity and worldview was a lot.
It sounds like it. I mean, I don't even know how one would navigate from being an adoptee to finding your roots, and then you're meeting your birth family, and then living in Korea. So what year were you adopted?
I was born in 1983. I was adopted when I was pretty much exactly a year old in 1984. If you take a look at the numbers, that was the biggest boom between about 1982 to 1985. The most amount of Korean kids were being adopted out all over the world. So it was quite a time. Probably the last 10 to 15 years, people have been researching the history and the processes and the systems, the relationship between two governments, two cultures. How did we get to a place where we are post-war in Korea, really struggling, to a place where thousands of children are leaving this country, to present day where we're really taking a look at what happened. It's so many different pieces, which is when you spend so many decades not thinking about it and it comes at you like an actual fire hose of information. So it's not just that you found your family, it's, I don't know anything about Korean history or culture or adoption history or culture.
That's right.
or it's so much to have to take on. So once in a while people will reach out to me and say, my kid wants to know about this or that. I'm like, well, which part, where are we at in the journey, right? Yeah, so it's very overwhelming, and really considered myself just this very like capable, put together person, and then suddenly I realized I didn't know anything. I actually didn't know anything about myself.
Yeah. And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking as a mother of adopted children, I wouldn't even like start guessing what they must be feeling inside. And we took our boys to Korea right before the pandemic. And we went to visit the hospitals that they were born. And my kids were born in the 2000s, so it's different than 1980s, right? And then we went to visit the adoptive agency, and one of them got to meet their foster mother who took care of him when he was pre-adoption stage. As an adoptive mom, my sense is that I could only be that stable person in their life, supporting and encouraging whatever that they want to do. We have no idea if they will ever go back and search for their birth families. We just don't know. I mean, I've asked, of course, right? And I told them that whenever you're ready, and we'll support you and help you and find the ways.
But I do want to respond to what you were saying before about your kids, because I think it's so important. Everyone's going to have a different opinion about this, of course. So, the caveat being, I only speak for myself and my experience. Sure. I mean, I think my parents did a great job at saying, do you want to go and learn Korean at the church on Saturdays? They sent me to the heritage camps where it was really valuable to see other kids who were also adopted, also living with all white families. There was a lot of normalization that I think was both and. It was really valuable for me to know that I fit into this world. And it also, I think, did normalize it in a way that didn't cause me to think critically about it for a long time. But I think that when you're a teenager, when you just want to fit in and you just want to feel like your world is solid and stable, that was really needed for me. Of course, everyone is different, but to me, I say to adoptive parents, you're doing everything that you can. Of course, they're not going to say, thank you so much for that information. I will take that under advisement and I will get back to you. But the seed planting and the continued reinforcement of, I'm here for you. I love you. This is your story. It's not a secret. And whatever you want to do, it's your choice whenever you're ready. I think this is all such valuable seed planting. The thing for me that you alluded to, which is so correct, that was the most earth-shattering for me, like a bomb going off in my life, wasn't simply that I found all this information. It's that I didn't know it was even possible. I think there's a difference, if you're growing up, think, you know what? I have that choice to go and find my family, which I do think is maybe another thread line through your brain that would nag at you. So I don't know how I would have done with that either. I don't know that it would have been easier. It would have been different. But for me personally, to have that, it wasn't just finding my family in Korea. It was, oh my gosh, I spent all this time not thinking it was possible. I could have found them 20 years ago. And so I think you're doing such a service to your kids. They've been to Korea. They know it's an option. And because it's so normalized for them, like, no, we can go to Korea, and if we want to do something with this information, we can. Yeah. And so I just want to validate for you. I think that that's so important.
Oh,
even if they're not saying thank you for validating me, Mom, I'm telling you, it's very important for them.
Yes, they are. Thank you so much for saying that. That's really encouraging. And we're going to go live in Jeju Island in Korea. What was that process like? Can you unpack that for us?
Oh, sure. Suddenly I'm in this space where I have this really niche identity, and you just want to find everyone you can who gets it. This is why these communities are so important. I opened the floodgates. Not only was the fire hose of information coming at me, but I also, helped myself out a little bit by opening some doors. And I found, lo and behold, this entire online community that I was ignoring because it wasn't popping up in my algorithms because I wasn't looking for it. And found, oh my gosh, there's podcasts about Korean adoptees. And I really thought, well, what are they talking about? This is how in the dark I was, like, oh my gosh, wow, there's like a dozen. And, obviously Instagram, social media accounts, books, essays, research, this whole world of information and community. So somebody said on the tour that I was going on that I mentioned, I found out about the tour through this podcast. And it's a pretty major one, Adopted with Kaomi Lee. She has since stopped it recently, but she did like 8 or 9 seasons of it, interviewing adoptees, from all over the world. So I was a good student. I downloaded it. I scrolled all the way to the bottom, and the very first episode on there was about a guy named Mark, who he says 5 minutes into the interview, I grew up in a little town called Royersford, which is where I was serving as mayor. Like I was standing in my kitchen listening to this the first ever anything I ever listened to about Korean adoptees, and it's about him. And he grew up 5 streets from where I was standing. So of course I'm posting about it on social media. And a college friend of my partner at the time saw it, and he said, "Wow, you were hiking an Ole trail 2 miles from where I work at a school." So I said, "Well, are there any job opportunities?" Because my partner and I were both in education, and there was. And so within a couple of months, there was like a handshake deal. For us, it was leaving everything that we've always known in the Northeast to move here. So it was much harder than I thought it was going to. I know it actually does sound hard. Everyone said, "Jenna, you knew this was going to be hard, right?" And I said, "No, I think I was the last person to realize." I was supposed to come back from Korea that first time and just be me again. I was just supposed to come back, be mom, be daughter, be wife, be mayor. And I really needed that community. So currently I'm teaching some English language classes, and I'm filling in here and there for friends at their hagwons, and I'm trying to host Korean adoptees who come to the island and do a day retreat with them, because I know how valuable it is, and I just rolled that business plan out a couple months ago. So I'm hoping that it will catch on. I sort of say that when people are ready to hear, because I spent 40 years not ready to listen or even know what I was supposed to be listening for. No matter what it is in life, we are not ready until we're ready. And I think there's so many people doing good work in this space, in this community, with the research aspect, the therapeutic aspect, the storytelling aspect. And the louder we are, the more visible we are, the more it's going to help people, whether you're 20 or whether you're 65, waking up one day and realizing, holy cow, I'm Korean. And maybe adoption has impacted my life more than I was led to believe or thought.
So you're on a journey, sounds like.
Yes, I've been on a journey. Yeah, and that's literally what I call it. And it's interesting, you asked a question before, and I have been reading my old journal entries, reading back over your past self, seeing how far you've come. That's a journey in and of itself. So
Yeah.
sure on a journey.
I know I'm having a hard time articulating, but I think I understand what you're saying.
Thank you. Part of the process is contact your adoption agencies to get records. And if they find anything, we will help facilitate, meeting your family. And I really thought, okay, fine, I will contact my adoption agency. I'll get my records. But again, I didn't think anything would come of it, because I have all of my records. My parents were very open about here's all the information we have. I've always had access to it. My mom is very organized. So I just didn't think there would be anything, because nobody shouts it from the rooftops that maybe there's more information. And lo and behold, there was. The baby home that my Appa took me to in Mokpo still exists. So that's sort of number one of the good news lottery, because so many of these baby homes don't exist anymore. Number two is I believe that the story goes that it was run by a Korean and a Japanese couple who were married, and they were just meticulous about keeping records. And so there was no question when my adoption agency found in my records, oh, this is the baby home that she was in, contacted them. They still exist. They have the records, and then they were willing to turn them over. All of this is, wow, there's like a dozen people who had to do their job that day correctly and then get back to me. Not everybody has the luxury of having a name and identification number. So that was in my files, and so they found my Appa within seconds because it's a government database. And then they helped facilitate sending a letter. He got back to them right away. And so I knew in February of 2022 that we were going to meet in June. And I spent a couple days with them. And it was the first time I met, of course, a woman who was related to me. And it really did something for me. We're driving around the cities of Mokpo, and I'm with my half sister, my Appa, his wife, and my Komo, and it was such a transformative experience. One thing led to another, and we decided to move here. In the process of finding my visa paperwork, but in that process, they found my original family register, and on that piece of paper was my birth mother's name and social security or
Oh,
identification number. So
wow.
all this information just kept falling on my lap, and I wasn't necessarily seeking it. And actually, when I received my birth mother's information, it took me a really long time to do anything with it because I had such complicated emotions about, being a mother myself and not understanding her story fully. And I had a lot of judgment towards her that didn't come about on my own. I mean, there's a lot of American culture where there's a lot of stories about the vilified birth mother who decides to keep her baby, and then there's a family who wanted a baby that story gets told over and over, and I know I had absorbed it. So I really wanted to be ready, and I knew I wanted to find her when I was living over here, right? So I did the same thing. I contacted my adoption agency. They turned it around pretty quickly and worked with the government and found her. And so I was able to meet her and a half brother and all of my aunts and uncles and several cousins in June. So that just happened a few months ago.
This is an unusual story, I think, because
It's
of
very
most of the
unusual.
adoptees don't get to their hands on these records and have this information to even search.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's when I started to realize exactly what you said, because again, I knew nothing. I knew nothing. When I started to realize how rare it was and how my story was so unusual, I started to have retroactive anxiety. I started to have, oh my gosh, what if I'd never met Melissa and she'd never told me about this trip? And I would have spent my
I
whole
see.
life not not knowing this huge piece of myself that I dismissed for so many years. And none of it was done maliciously, none of it was done on purpose. It is simply the going about in survival mode of your life, and you only know what you know. And anything that threatens the reality of your life and the foundation of your life feels a little dangerous. And even if you can't articulate that at the time, you look different. I knew, obviously knew I was adopted, very supportive family. But there's a lot of pieces to that where it's difficult sometimes to hear, I know you loved me, and there were more things that I needed that none of us could have known that I would have needed. So now here I am, middle aged, going through this process. I mean, it's no wonder that my life exploded a little bit. And so now I'm just trying to pick up the pieces and make sure my kids are feeling loved, and supported through their process because they're so little and they have little brains and hearts. And, the opposite is happening because now I find myself in a position where I have taken them from their culture that they know and are familiar with in America and dropped them in the middle of an island in Korea where all of their classmates are Korean. And they have some friends, but it's difficult. They don't speak Korean and they're very fully American as am I. So that cultural piece is also a huge journey.
I know you're all smiling and sharing it very, very peacefully and with good spirit. But I could only imagine it must have been so painful. Such a huge history being unraveled. And like, what do you do with all this? How do you process? Where are you now in this journey?
Yeah. Well, I can tell that you talk to a lot of people and you're incredibly intuitive because you're right. I mean, I know as a coping skill that I didn't understand that's what it was. But my whole life, I've been smiling my way through anything that was uncomfortable. So you get very good at diverting people who have uncomfortable questions about the way you look and your life. And it's a really weird thing as a child to constantly have well intentioned, sometimes really positive questions that all they're doing is pointing out that you're different. And you can be, it's the thing that makes you special, and it's the thing that makes you seen, and it's also the thing that makes you unsure about yourself. So all of this comes to a head when you suddenly find yourself in a position of understanding all of those dominoes falling. So when I got back to the United States from Korea that first time, and I alluded to this before, I do describe it as those old crash test dummy commercials where you can see the slow motion of a car going towards a wall. And these, it's a little comical when you watch it with the crash test dummies, but what it's showing is something pretty traumatic. They're about to crash into a wall. And for the first time, I was really self-aware that I was watching myself crash slowly into a wall. And there were moments where I wanted to pick up and move away. Like I'll just leave and start over, and I will go someplace where nobody knows me and who I am, so that I don't have to unpack and deconstruct this new identity and all the things that I thought were true that are not, all the things that I now feel I've missed out on top of loving my life and loving my children and being grateful for my parents, and now suddenly in a position of mourning this thing I never knew that I had lost, because it's very dangerous to think about having two sets of parents, two mothers. You know that intellectually, there's no getting around it, but knowing it intellectually and really feeling it and having to understand that loss is, and I'm still trying to get my brain around. And like I said before, no one really knew how to help me. I didn't know how to help myself. I mean, in defense of everybody who loves me, including my partner at the time, I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know the questions that I needed someone to ask me. I found an incredible therapist. Thank you, therapy. And at just the right time, finding an Asian American therapist who was able to talk through all of these things with me was, it was really powerful. And thank goodness. I don't think I ever would have actually gone to my car and driven away, but that was the impulse every day. And I had to continue raising my kids and going to events and smiling and pretending like everything was okay. And because I'm who I am, instead of sitting and really processing, Jenna, you just met your birth father that you didn't know existed until 6 months ago, we started packing up our lives and got everything ready for an international move. So like, it's okay. You know what? I'll think about the fact that my entire identity and world blew up later. I'm gonna do this first because that's something very tangible I can do. I'll start a farmer's market for the town instead of admitting to anyone that I am in a bad place, because that sounds too hard. And so when we got to Korea and suddenly I'm not mayor anymore, I don't know anyone here, I can't speak the language, that's when things started to really implode. But I also know that the quiet and the stillness is something that I really need. To write is really therapeutic for me. And so I appreciate that you said that you're reading my writing, because a lot of it is for myself. And if somebody is able to get something from it, I think belonging and identity and acceptance, these are all universal things. And we're all going through something that makes our world explode a little bit every time there's a life shift happening to us. So
Sure.
I had a great therapist. I have a wonderful support system all over the world.
I recently read your story about birthdays.
Yes.
And your birth mother tells you that no, that you were not born on that day. You were born on such a date.
This speaks to such a bigger thing, right? The first, I was questioning everything, because when you start finding out these things about yourself that it never occurred to you to think about or were just wrong, it really calls into question your whole being. And so my Appa sitting there across the table when I first meet him, and he's like, no, that's not your birthday. And I started thinking about birthdays. I mean, we are a little bit obsessed all over the world about our birthdays, astrological signs and lunar dates and big celebrations for your first birthday. There's a whole thing. And so it's not a big deal. It's only a month difference. I do think at this point, my birthday actually that I've always celebrated, I do actually think that is correct. I think that he recognizes the lunar birthday, and my Amma also recognizes the lunar birthday, but she just has it. They have a different memory of when the moon was rising that year. And so I've come around to it a little bit in that I'm okay with having 3 birthdays, especially if, someone wants to take me out to dinner 3 times, to honor him, to honor her, and to honor, the life I've always had. And in my most optimistic moments, I tell myself, this has added a lot of layers and complex variables to my life. However, it also does mean that I have triple the amount of people in this world who love me that I now know about, and who love my kids and want to do right by me. And there's nothing wrong. And that's not a bad place to be, if you're looking at a 30,000-foot view. So there are real low moments where I get into the weeds of what ifs and, what now, and how do I process this, and what could have been and what will be now. But at the end, there is also, I think, a really lovely story of many, many people who were trying to do the best that they could. The other unusual thing about my story is that A, I found everyone. B, they all wanted to meet me, and they all want me in their life, which is another huge sticking point that many from my generation and prior just don't have that, because there still is a stigma around you had a baby out of wedlock, or et cetera. We're still a pretty conservative culture over here in Korea. There was no underhanded bad stuff happening. There are some really difficult truths that people that are in my situation have to contend with. Not only am I losing my culture, not only did I not know my birth mother, not only did I realize I'm Korean, and what if the whole premise of my life was built on a lie? So the other thing that helps me sleep a little bit better at night is, while my birth parents have a different recollection of how things happened, which is going to happen in any relationship, there is a little bit of peace for me in that I know that they both did the best that they could. What I wish could have happened is that there was more support for single parents. Well, everywhere in the world, in present day included, that there's more support for single parents. And I do think it was a little bit of a Band-Aid and an accepted practice that, well, if you can't take care of your baby, we're not going to help you, but you can send your baby away. On the other hand, I can't regret or begrudge that decision either, because I had a darn good life in America with lots of opportunities and wouldn't have my babies. There's all of that. How much of our brain do humans use? It's a very small percent, but it's having to use all these parts of your brain muscles to try, if you intellectualize the way I do as a coping skill, to try to figure all this out. And what's equally difficult is someone like a loved one needs a heck of a lot of time and patience and care and curiosity to sit and listen to me talk about all of this over many, many months. So that's what I say. I have the best support system in the world. I have friends who have had to listen to me talk about this every single day and go through the movements. They read my essays and go, oh, I remember when you were going through that. And they're not saying this, but I know they're thinking, and other people get to read about it in a tidy 4-page summary. It took you months to work through what does your birthday mean to you, So I think that's really the big take-home message for me is we want to boil everything down to a meme on social media. We want so desperately for people to understand, because we want kind of a tidy package to understand really complex issues. And you just can't. I mean, You just can't.
No. Is your
But it is.
Korean getting better?
Oh, no. I know. I have to, I actually, I know I could learn how to say I don't speak Korean in Korean, but instead I found it's actually much easier if I go around this country and say, "Oh, no,
Mm.
한국말 없어요." Because I know if I say it correctly, no
Uh-huh.
one will believe me and they'll just start
Uh-huh.
speaking Korean to
Uh-huh.
me. So you have to kind of
Uh-huh.
give the tilt of the head and scrunch your eyebrows,
Yeah.
and you have to say it wrong. Like I don't have Korean 한국말 없어요. So I know how to say like very basic things.
Uh,
I know how to order coffee, which is the most
okay.
important thing.
My gosh, how do you like live in a country where you don't speak the language too well? Well, actually, my parents came over and they didn't really speak any English and they survived.
Again, intellectually understanding and experiencing it, and believe me, I still don't really understand the full extent of like what your parents went through. Yeah, it's just different and you can't put your finger on it until you are experiencing it. So I am really happy, but yeah, it is hard. That language barrier is really hard.
Yeah, and the cultural barrier as well. Are you planning on coming back to the States anytime?
Someday, yes, I know
Mm.
that whoever's listening who loves me in the United States will be happy. Someday we will come back. And my partner and I really discussed this even before coming over here. There was an awareness. How do I say this? The level of academic expectations in
Mm.
Korea
Hmm.
are very different than the United
Hmm.
States. I
Hmm.
think my kids they're getting such an exceptional world-class education right now. Um, my kids are bright. I joke. I say my kids are really bright. They're not Korean bright.
Uh-oh.
I mean, I know it's very different. I mean, their classmates, your parents
Hmm.
who eventually speak two languages.
Hmm.
My daughter is American age 5. Last
Hmm.
year she was American age 4 and her classmates were probably 5 or 6 American age. And they're speaking fluent English on top of knowing Korean and they're learning English and Korean in school and phonics. It's
Yeah.
astounding. And so
Hmm.
the pressures I know by the time they get to middle school, not only academically but socially, we're in a little bit of a
Hmm.
unique position on the island that all of their classmates not only are predominantly Korean, but they're also very, very wealthy Korean. And so I know it's any day now my daughter's going to come home and say, Mama, why don't I have any Chanel? And I'm going to say, well, Mama wants Chanel before you get any Chanel. So it's not only
Hmm.
cultural, but there's a socioeconomic thing. There's an academic thing here. It is difficult to find work here if you're not already hooked into the international schools, or if you're not a natural English teacher, which I am not, or if you're not working for government or tech. These are just skills that I don't have. And so there will be a moment too where, there are just things that are going to be a lot easier for me in
Yeah.
America. And my
Yeah.
kids, they miss it. They're American,
Hmm.
they miss their grandparents and all the things. So we will
Hmm.
eventually go back. When we are sitting on the floor of my Appa's country home around a table with the most delicious Korean food ever, and I know that my kids are now going to always have those memories and it's going to be normal for them. That really does something to me. Um, is they don't think about it any differently now. We go and we sit on the floor and we eat. And something that I keep saying over and over is a really big difference between this culture and the one that I grew up in is when Koreans are together, they are really, really together. I mean, they're sleeping on the floor together. They're sitting shoulder to shoulder around a table. No one has an individual plate. Everybody's sharing food. We're going to the saunas and the bathhouses where everybody can just see everything and nobody thinks anything of it. For a conservative culture, the opposite end is that when you're in it and you're in the club, when you're feeling that zhang, you feel it. And no amount of language, you don't need it in order to feel the food and the love and the accommodations. I wrote an article that's coming out soon, coming out soon
Mm.
about, hair. hair in Korea and the mothers and the grandmothers. It is such a thing to do your kids' hair. I mean, I met my grandmother on my Appa side, and one of the first things she did is she wanted to sit and brush and braid my hair, and my sister blow drying my daughter's hair. There's something about the care that I know inherently without having to ask her. My birth mother, that's something that she missed out on and will never get to do with me, is to sit and brush my hair in a way that is just not as pervasive in the culture in America. And I can't put my finger on it, but I've noticed it. And it's those little things that I never would have understood or known or even thought about if I didn't have an opportunity to live here. And so there's so much positive, layered on top of a lot of the difficult stuff. But I hope those are the things that, because I know them, I can pass on to them. And well, I love what you're doing with this podcast, because there is something really beautiful and something really complex about straddling the line between two really different, distinct cultures.
Yes.
And somebody pointed out that, we talk about, the Asian American experience and the Korean American experience. And someone said, you know what? There are so many of us. There's so many of us adoptees that we're not a one-off. And we can really be our own culture. And that means we can make it look however we want. And I think that's true of everybody. When we get back to the States, we'll absolutely have some sort of chuseok and solal something. It's not going to look like it will at my Appa's house, but it certainly won't look like what Americans are doing, because they're not even celebrating it. But it'll be some combination of getting together with friends to work in what it looks like for us. So
right.
I think that's exactly what you're doing too, and to spread that awareness and to think a little critically about it for fun reasons as much as critical ones is really important. So this is awesome that you're doing this.
Thank you so much. As I was raising my children, when I really struggled with how much of this Korean culture do I teach them or pass down to them, and really had some sort of a crisis moment while I was raising them, because I don't know either. You're right. Like, we have our own Korean American culture, which is all meshed together. Even the food that I make, it's not really authentic Korean food, but my kids know as Korean food, and that's okay. That's the culture that we're making and building together. And that's what we pass down, and that's what we're embracing. So yes, you're absolutely right.
I had this moment when we were on the tour, when I first came here, if it was reversed. So if the situation was reversed and there were a bunch of adopted folks from all over the world doing a motherland tour in America, let's just pretend 30 people show up in America for the first time who have been raised all over the world, let's say. It would be so fascinating, because if they all, like 10 of them, met their birth families in America, one family could be German descent, Polish, Italian. They could be Asian American, African American. So it was one of those things too, where we all had this unique experience of coming to one pretty homogenous culture, where when you sit down with your Korean family, Korean food is Korean food by and large. There's going to be kimchi of all different varieties on the table. So I found that really interesting too, that there is such power, like I said before, in this Korean adoptee community, but also when we all come back to this country, we are experiencing with our families, if we meet them, or with friends or host families, the same type of thing. And so there's something really magical about that, I think, because I have friends who are my age with my daughter's class, and I ask them, what are you doing in Chuseok? Are you making all the food? Are you honoring the ancestors? And a lot of them are saying, no, we're not doing some of those things anymore, because, we're modern women. We're not going to stand in the kitchen for 3 days and cook all the food, and and then not even get to bow to the ancestors because the men get to do that. I totally understand that, and I'm all for it. But there is also a part of me that's like, I am so grateful that I do get to experience, my kids get to experience some of the traditional things. I don't think I'm ever going to create the table, and I will make them bow to me. But, there's something, it's a both and. So I will say I have some second gen, third gen Korean American friends in the States, and we do have so much in common to talk about. They more than anyone can really understand some of the imposter syndrome. They also don't know the language. They also don't know if they're doing the right thing, because I feel like such a fish out of water when I'm trying to do things. And so I think the lesson is we're all just trying to make it. We're all just trying to do the best we can. And
So true. We'll be happier if we actually embrace the fact that we're just trying to make it.
yes, I think so. We're going to make that expectation,
Yeah.
because who's really judging us? The only people judging us are ourselves. We put too much I know I do. I put way too much pressure on myself. And for who? For what?
So what is your plan in Korea now that you are doing your retreat?
It's a personalized half or full day retreat program specifically designed for Korean adoptees. What is it for you where you will most be able to reflect, reclaim your story, and leave feeling renewed? So those are my three sort of target points. And that can be for anyone. But there is, like I said before, I think some real value in being in the motherland with a fellow adoptee. I'm not a trained therapist. I'm not a certified life coach, but what I am is experienced in a life experience that I will share with people who are coming to the island. And I know for me, I'm giving people what I would have wanted, or really what I did have when I first came here. There's so much pressure. You're trying to keep everybody happy. There's so much to pack into a 2 or 3 week trip back to Korea, and it has so many complex emotions. It's not just a vacation, and you have to contend with your family back home, and maybe you're meeting birth family, and so to come to the island, which is an hour flight from Seoul, it's as easy as taking the bus, and I can just guide you through it, so you don't have to think about it. And then you can spend a day with me, and it's all inclusive, and just make sure that you are able to have that time for yourself. Substack, I have a Substack. It's jennaleekim.substack.com. And my mission really is, like I said at the beginning, is of all the people who are doing this work, yourself included, people are going to find community all kinds of places. The more places that we are, the easier it will be for someone like me who is in crisis mode, watching themselves crash slow motion into a wall mentally and emotionally. And when we need those people and we need to hear these stories, I'm hoping that maybe I can be one of them, because people feeling alone, nothing ever good comes from people feeling alone. And we live in a world now, technology makes things kind of terrible sometimes, but the good news about technology is that you never need to feel alone. So that's most of the reason why I do the work that I do. It's therapeutic for me, and it's also a bonus if it ends up being therapeutic for somebody else.
What I found interesting about your story and how you tell your story was I really felt that warmth and genuineness. You're making your journey of healing. You're not stuck in a bitter place.
Oh,
if that makes sense.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's not linear. I certainly have moments that are dark and sad.
Of course.
And I think, speaking personally, for me, I need to be thinking about it in a forward motion for my own survival. And I've had some people say, because there are so many really, really hard stories, so many topics we haven't touched on because they're not my story. My biggest message is because I didn't know that it was possible to have this outcome. I had no idea it was possible to have records, meet family, didn't know. I want them to understand that that's not a reason not to look. You still don't have to look, That's people go their whole lives, and it's perfectly fine, and everyone has the right to that decision. But I know that I wouldn't have looked because I really thought there was nothing out there. And I just want people to know that that's not necessarily true. Now, of course, you don't know what you're going to find, or you don't know what you're not going to find. And my story is an anomaly in 16 different ways. But I think because it has turned out so positive, which I feel a little guilty about sometimes when I hear some of the other stories. But mine is a possibility, and it could be a possibility for others. And so,
We all have our own stories that we are weaving through, and that's why we call it a journey. And some days are darker than others, and we go through those motions, which is perfectly fine.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, good luck in your journey on Jeju Island.
Thank you. Yes, and I hope that you can visit and we can share a meal together down here.
It'll be fun. Thank you so much, Jenna, for your time. I really appreciate you being on this podcast and loved every moment of our conversation.
감사합니다, 언니.
언니, 천만에요. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.